Whether you are a dealer or doctor or trafficker or a manufacturer, if you break the law and illegally peddle these deadly poisons, we will find you, we will arrest you, and we will hold you accountable. If we don't get tough on the drug dealers, we're wasting our time. Just remember that. We're wasting our time. And that toughness includes the death penalty.
That was President Trump visiting New Hampshire today, outlining his response to the opioid epidemic. The death penalty news is getting the headlines, but let's take a look at some of the other fine print that was included. He's taking a three-pronged approach, focusing on law enforcement, education, which includes public service announcements, and addiction treatment. The enforcement arm also includes mandatory minimums for certain offenders. The U.S. already has the harshest sentences for drug crimes in the world, and that's driven the era of mass incarceration. Ours is by far the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and minorities disproportionately impacted. Now, couple that with Attorney General Jeff Sessions cracking down on drug crimes and pushing for maximum sentences and mandatory minimums, and you've got a rollback of the Obama-era moves that were aimed at trying to reduce prison populations by keeping some nonviolent offenders out of jail. And I got to tell you guys, my first reaction was this is a throwback to the just say no days of the late 80s and early 90s, when it was, you know, what we need are larger prison times in the public service campaign. Did you hear anything, I'll start with you, Jeannie, today that made you feel like it would actually help in this fight against opioids?
No, I mean, I don't think we heard anything new. As you mentioned, the only thing getting the headlines is the death penalty, and that may be, to a certain extent, new in the United States in relation to this type of issue. But beyond that, there's nothing new. And I think what's so frustrating for me is that there's very little data to support that death penalty, increased prison time, increased focus on how we round up and deal with these people is going to have any impact on or help the victims of this crisis. And so, you listen to him and people in the room were cheering for what he was saying, and yet I found very little there to support that this was going to change anything that's going on in terms of this crisis.
For me, as I think about this issue in the context of the president, it's kind of an interesting cocktail. You have a man who has addiction in his family, form of his brother, who famously does not drink, reportedly because of that. So there's a personal element for the president in this. And also, and I hate to sound crass about it and talk about a very serious issue in purely political terms, but it's a big political winner for the president, because the opioid crisis disproportionately hits places that Trump won and needs to win in order to stay as president. And I can't imagine that does not play a big role on his willingness to step out and demonstrate something that he never does, which is compassion.
And I think well, I'm not sure there was a lot of compassion in what we heard today, but I think you're absolutely right in terms of the political benefits that he could get from this. But to me, this felt like a lot of bombast. I mean, particularly when it comes to the death, no, I understand, but particularly when it comes to the death penalty, I know I'm not the first one to say this, but drug dealers, drug kingpins live under the threat of a death sentence every day of their lives. Do you really think they're going to be motivated by the possibility of being executed if they're caught and arrested? Not to mention the disproportionate racial and ethnic lines that we have in terms of drug prosecutions now.
But Andrew, this speaks to a much larger issue where partisan Republicans such as myself, the true deep sense of sadness that I feel for our country and my party right now are rooted in the fact that we own the presidency and we own both chambers of Congress, and yet we are not spending any time talking about policy, talking about the Republican philosophy, talking about how to implement legislation in a way that will move the country forward in a Republican vein. So what do we, did you expect that we were going to get some deep policy pronouncement from this president that made any sense or moved the ball forward? There's no indication of that he's ever done that.
And let's not forget, how long is it going to take us all to realize that you cannot prosecute your way out of these problems? And every prosecutor will tell you that. That is not the answer. It's got to be part of it, but that is not the solution to this problem. You say it over and over, and this is what they come out with.
But I almost thought we were there already over the last few years. We seem to have been trending that way, and this seems like a complete 180.
Throwback, yeah.
I didn't watch the announcement. Did he address the whole legalization movement? Was that part of the discussion? Because that's another complicating political factor here, right? You've seen all sorts of polling that suggests that Republicans, that red states, the legalization numbers are high in terms of public opinion.
For marijuana, to be fair, that's for marijuana.
Sure, but understood, but
yeah, no, he didn't. As far as I know, he did not address that, and nor did the commission.
He didn't. And You know, in the soundbite that we played for him, he was talking about dealers and manufacturers, but I mean, does anybody think that the manufacturer of opioids is going to wind up with a death sentence, or is going to wind up facing stiff? I mean, that's the other part that I find incredibly cold in all of this, that the tough talk that he's talking about is only going to be on the user end or close to the user end, not addressing the problem. You have hundreds of communities, counties, municipalities suing opioid manufacturers. The president didn't talk about that at all.
And let's not forget that this is something that needs to be dealt with from a healthcare perspective. We need lots of money devoted to this issue in the context of healthcare. None of that is forthcoming, nor is it for mental health care. The beds that we need to deal with these things, none of that is forthcoming. It's all about punishment, 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 which is the absolute end of the problem. And you need to deal with the beginning of the problem.
And he's still looking to roll back Medicaid and Medicare, which would also help in that process too.
But to Jeannie's point, what this problem requires is a skill set that this president fundamentally doesn't have, which is the ability to convene many stakeholders in a way that solves a problem across the enterprise. And there is no indication that this president or this White House is capable of doing that.
The one solution that he offered that does seem to fit into his skill set is on the PSAs, the advertising campaign. And you know, I can think of one or two over the years that has been effective in terms of at least lodging in our public consciousness, and it's this one.
Sure.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. And that's like 25 years old or 30 years old, and I still remember this ad. But does anybody at this table actually think that a beefed up public service ad campaign is going to reduce our rates of drug abuse or drug use? Or
I do actually happen to believe, I'm not going to say there's a direct correlation, but I do think the government should invest in public education of that sort. I think that is absolutely fine if it's part of a larger package of addressing these issues. Because, you know, you look at somebody like John Carlo, he does this kind of work. It does have an impact. But, I mean, you're not doing it on drugs, but he does have this kind, it does have an impact. But that can't be the only thing that they put out there.
No, I understand. And I think it can be effective, but as you said, it can't be the only thing. And right now it seems like all we're offering are some PSAs, and we'll kill you if you don't follow that.
Yeah, well, unsurprising.
One other thing, the president did not, he said that he wants treatment and expanded treatment, but he's not asking for any additional money from Congress. He's sort of punting to Congress on that, let them come up with the money. I mean, shouldn't that have been a part of this also?
It should have been the first thing that was addressed. I mean, treatment is where it is at. I mean, that is the first thing that has to be addressed, and you have to pay for that. And he can't leave that to Congress. He's got to lead them to that. He said today he wanted this to be a cornerstone. He didn't want to leave in 7 years with this problem the way it is. But he's going to, if all he offers, to your point, are PSAs and a lot of punishment for people who deal.
There are also government officials in the form of attorneys general who have been dealing with and fighting this issue for decades. And it would be nice if this president showed a little humility and convened them to say, I know you have been and your predecessors have been on the front lines of this for a long, long time. What do you know? What can I learn? And how can we come to a solution?
Well, I think the problem is what the answers he would have gotten would have been, we're treating this more like a health issue than a law enforcement issue, and he wants to treat it more like a law enforcement issue. All right, up next, big-name Republicans have been shying away from taking on Andrew Cuomo, but a famous actress who's a Democrat is now running against Cuomo. We're going to look at Cynthia Nixon's campaign and how she plans to go after the governor.